Hello, peeps. I'm back. This is Kimberly Purpose, and welcome to my channel. I'm a little tired. I've been um, working and staying up all night because I'm back in school. Been pulling overnighters with my papers and since things that's due for this doctoral program that I'm in. Uh, yeah, but anyway, I wanted to share another video about Jim Crow. With Martin Luther King holidays coming up, I took my son to do some volunteer work through this team program that he's in and to do some work in the community. I started thinking about Dr. Martin Luther King and, I saw Dane Calloway's video about Martin Luther King. And it sort of put me in the mind about Jim Crow, the Jim Crow laws that took place. I did a video a while back about the stories that my grandmother told me, ancestral stories, about what took place and how our identity as American Aborigines has been stripped. And she mentioned about the laws, of course, with the Dawes Roll, and also how she explained to me how Jim Crow law was not only used to treat blacks, you know, aka African Americans, as second class citizens. Um, it was used also to strip us further away from our indigenous roots to this land and to ensure that we would not um, be able to lay claim to our land here in the Americas, and also to have a true identity like we were supposed to. But I came across this particular article um, on Indigenous Americans.com. I'm not sure, this person didn't put the author's name on here. Um, there's no, I don't have, doesn't have the author's name on here, but they did have some really good resources on here. Yeah, but anyway, it has some good um, points in here. Where to get started at. But I thought this was quite interesting about how this person, I guess they want to stay anonymous, as to how um, the African Americans, the aka American Aborigines identity was stripped the through Jim Crow. But let's see. Let's show how it starts. It says 5 million indigenous Americans present when Columbus arrived. It says prior to 1720, slavery was 9 to 10 times higher among native indigenous people than African imports from America from the slave trade. And that is so true. I read some research. Emory University done a study on slavevoyages.org that explains and shows how they have an extensive database showing that not that many African Americans, um, Africans was brought over on ships. Majority of the people that were in slavery during the 1700s were Aborigines. Let's continue. It says Native Americans were reclassified as colored racial due to the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. See, I need to look up that. That's good information right there. I've been hearing that a lot, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. And I find it strange that right around that same time period, towards the end, the Dawes Roll took place. The Dawes Commission, and then simultaneously, right as they phased out the Dawes Commission, they brought the Racial Integrity Act. See, this is how they did it through the paper genocide. Let's continue. Jim Crow laws were a set of oppressive laws not only used to segregate but also reclassify Native American Indians into the category of colored. See, there you have it. This is what they did. They reclassified everybody. It says Jim Crow reached its greatest influence during the decade of 1910, 1920, and 1930. See, this is during the same time they were doing all this reclassification, and then they occurred right uh, during the ends of Dawes Roll. That's when they started allowing the Indians and the Great Caucasoids to come in during the 1910, 1920 and take the identity of the Aborigines. We were not allowed to put our names down as tribes on purpose because what their whole ulterior motive was is to hide behind Mongoloid Indians and put themselves in there. And so that's why you have all these grays in the reservations right now collecting all this money and stealing our land, hoarding it for themselves. And this is exactly how they did it. It says Jim Crow reached its greatest influence during the decades of 1910, 1920, and 1930. Among the Jim Crow laws were Hippo Descendants Law. Wow. I gotta look all these laws up. The laws that were responsible for the one drop rule. See, that's what they did. Woo! Tennessee adopted the statutes in 1910 and Louisiana soon followed. Then Texas and Arkansas in 1911, Mississippi in 1917, North Carolina in 1923 followed suit. And so eventually all these states followed these crazy rules, Jim Crow rules, to ensure that blacks, these crazy laws didn't cover up the fact that we were indigenous here. This is exactly what they did. They didn't want to pay reparation. This is the bottom line. And they want to hoard the benefits for themselves. But Great Caucasoids are not indigenous here. And those people that they have in there are half breeds and probably a few Mongoloids in there, but majority of them are Caucasoids, Caucasians. They probably more, I'd say about 85% or 90% of them don't even have any black Aborigine DNA in them. I would say that because all of them look like Europeans. But anyway, it says here, the state of North Carolina vital records began using the law in labeling Native Americans as colors before Walter Peckler initiated in Virginia. Birth records were also delayed in states enforcing the one drop rule. They were filed late to make the racial changes. See? And I also heard that some court records purposely burned and destroyed records on purpose, and showing any documentation of any Aborigines, any aka African Americans. They destroyed the records purposely to try to cover up massive burning and destroying the records, and along with changing the records. See, that's what they were doing. Reclassifying in the original records, they probably destroyed it. That's unethical and that's very illegal. Very, very illegal. What they did. Just because they want to hoard everything for themselves and not want to pay us back for putting us, changing the whole history books, lying, saying that we were slaves when actually our ancestors were prisoners of war. They were fighting them to try to keep their land. That's what all of this was all about. And not only that, they also not just changing the records. They also, nowadays I've been reading about the Indian mounds, how they let people go in and steal the ancient artifacts. Artifacts are missing or hidden. It makes it easier to keep this narrative going that all the half-breeds and Great Caucasoids are the Indians, when in actuality they're not. They're not the original people. And that's why these Indians, that's in there, trying to say we're culture vultures when in actuality they're the culture vultures. They rode on Jim Crow, and we weren't allowed to go to our indigenous roots because of the tortures that they were doing during the Jim Crow time, of lynchings, the killings, and everything to ensure that they can keep this narrative going. But you know what? Yahweh is watching. That's why this plague is on them, and I know it's going to continue until they do right. You know, till the great Caucasoids do right, and the truth will set them free if they do the right thing. But they don't because they want to keep the narrative going. But we're going to continue. It says here, fact: the state of North Carolina vital records began to use the law to labeling Native Americans as colored before Walter Peckler initiating the Virginia birth records delayed the states. The one-jot rule they were filed late to meet the racial changes. So I read that. It says, as registered, Dr. Walter Peckler directed the reclassification of nearly all Virginia Indians as colored on their birth certificate and marriage certificates because he was convinced that most Indians had African heritage and were trying to pass as Indians to evade segregation. See? They did this because they didn't want us to have our indigenous root. They wanted to strip us of our indigenous heritage. And that's exactly what they did with the paper genocide. And so this is what just took place. And that was the whole point of Jim Crow, to ensure that that happens, along with what the criminal Walter Peckler did, the crooked, evil criminal. I did another video a while back about, I believe, I can't remember what's the name of it, but I discussed Walter Peckler, an Indian country article that I read. I think it was the 5 myths of about Native Americans. And then inside the article, it mentioned Walter Peckler as well. So if you want to see a picture of him, you can go to that article and take a look at it. But anyway, I think it was the 8 myths. But let's continue. It says, consequently, 2 or more generations of Virginia natives and their ethnic identity altered on public documents. Peckler tampered with the vital records of Virginia Indian tribes, made it impossible for descendants of 6 of the 8 tribes recognized by the state to gain federal recognition because they could no longer prove their American Indian ancestry by documents. Historically, continuity, paper genocide. White census takers during the 1800s were instructed to ignore Native American heritage and paint most southern states in America with either black or white populations. And see, that's how they did it. The Indians didn't die off. The Indians are the African Americans. We are the Aborigines. And they took us off due to Jim Crow and all this. But I'm going to stop right here because this goes into other things. I think it goes more background information about the genetic makeup and the history of the Aborigine, American Aborigines, how we got here, and the DNA, and more added proof that we're here. I might do another video on this part, but I was mostly want to focus on this top part, on the about Jim Crow. You know, I really, I really wanted to learn more about the Jim Crow because I know my grandmother mentioned it too. While she was living, about the Jim Crow and how Jim Crow was how they stripped the indigenous roots of African Americans away from us, and that's why so much has been erased and deleted. So I just wanted to share with you all that Jim Crow was not just about segregation and the oppression of blacks through unjust practices of lynchings and separate only, color here, color only, and whites only. and sitting at the back of the bus. It also included them stripping us from our indigenous rights. They didn't want us to classify as Indians, even though that was our right, and majority of us are the indigenous people. And now it's to the point where we have to fight with folks and argue with people just to stay, to reclaim our heritage that was stolen. Mongoloids was not here first; we were, and the Caucasoids, great Caucasoids, was the last one to get here. And so they behinds definitely should not be on there, but they are the ones that's hoarding it and trying to keep this narrative going. So I just wanted to let you know that Jim Crow was all those things, yes, but also was a mechanism, a force that's added on with the crazy laws that were passed, you know, and with Peckler reclassifying everything and then them destroying records purposely just because they don't want to pay reparation and they want to put themselves as indigenous. Europeans should not be called Americans. The Americans, they are actually European Americans, and we should call them European Americans. Because African American is definitely a misnomer for us. We are the true Americans, and our true title is Aborigine Americans. And I just wanted to share with you all another history moment about the Jim Crow law. You know, since it's Martin Luther King's celebrated month, his birthday's coming up. So I just wanted to share that fact with you. He right before he died, he tried to tell us about our indigenous roots, and I think he was the leader of the time of the Jim Crow laws, and how I thought tied in with the holidays of Martin Luther King Day. But I can go on and on and on. I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna put a link to this article below. It's very, very long and lengthy. It has more information and everything. I'm gonna read up about these laws, the Racial Integrity Act, and it would be interesting to read up on these laws. I think these laws speaks for itself and explain exactly what happened and what took place. But please like these video, thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. And please visit me on Black Junction TV. It's free. You please subscribe over there. I have a channel over there. I'm gonna put the link to that as well. And I would love to hear from you, your thoughts and everything. And till next time, families, peace and be blessed. Bye bye.